Radhe Radhe. Today is Saturday, 25th May, 2024. And here we are to present to you this recap video for today's Bhagavad Gita study session, where we continue to progress along our journey of chapter 9. Here along with me is Mummy.
Radhe Radhe.
So bringing up the screen, we'll show you the cover slide. We covered chapter 9, verses 6, 7, and 8 today. Of course, after the usual recap quiz, that was for last week's content, chapter 9, verses 4 and 5. Please make sure you go through that material. And then now let's hear a rendition of chapter 9, verse 6, followed by some explanation, and then the next set of verses.
Yatha kashasthito nityam vayu sarvatra gomahan tatha sarvani bhutani madsthani tyupadharaya.
So chapter 9, verse 6, the catchphrase here is rest assured, a phrase that hopefully all of you are familiar with. And we did see now through the translation and commentary, Sri Krishna has given this analogy to Arjun and vicariously, us through Arjun, know that as the mighty wind. So the mighty wind blows everywhere, yet it rests always in the sky. Analogously or similarly, all of us living beings are always resting in God. So Swamiji mentions that, Matstani is a phrase that has been used 3 times in chapter 9, verses 4, 5, and 6. Mummy mentioned it as something important to add to your Sanskrit dictionaries. She may mention other things as well, but all of you, of course, 5 verses or phrases each time for each verse. Matstani, extremely important, and that is all living beings resting in God. We cannot be separated from God, even though, of course, with this affinity or attraction to material nature or matter, we are rotating or floating through these different bodies lifetime after lifetime. Swamiji gives us a pictorial example of what not necessarily to connect it with, which is the example of Atlas holding up the world. And that's from Greek mythology. And that is, of course, one representation in that mythology. But here we're seeing Sri Krishna says explicitly, all living beings are not on God, but in God, always resting in God. So you want to imagine cosmos, space, that entire absolute truth, that all-pervading aspect of God, and in living beings, as we learned later in the next 2 verses, as a reminder, being this part of primordial material energy, that is what is resting in God. So Swamiji mentions that, of course, this analogy is something useful for Arjun and us. The wind, it can blow nonstop or incessantly, continuously, something to add to your English dictionaries. And yet, when it is resting, or even all that time where it is residing, that is in the sky itself. So similarly, we as souls, we do not have an existence independent of God. We are in these transitory bodies, but as souls, consciousness, it's always existence within God. Swamiji does add as well that, of course, God, does go through that whole process of creation, maintenance, and annihilation. We'll see that in the next couple of verses as well. And all this is happening as part of God's grand design or plan in accordance to his will. And so again, likewise, everything is considered to be resting in him. Next, we're going to see chapter 9, verses 7 and 8, which are together.
Sarvabhutani kaunteya prakritim yanti mamikam kalpakshay punastani kalpadau visrijamyaham prakritim swam avashtabhya visrijami punah punah bhutagramam imam kritsnam avasham prakritirvashat.
So chapter 9, verse 7, the catchphrase here is material merger, hopefully quite self-explanatory. Whereas for chapter 9, verse 8, the catchphrase as a question is formed by force, So here in these two verses, Sri Krishna says that at the end of this massive time period, which is a kalp, we have seen that back in chapter 8, all living beings merge, and they merge back into Sri Krishna's primordial material energy. So that's the material merger. However, when the next cycle of creation starts, so at the beginning of the next kalp, Sri Krishna manifests all these living beings again. Sri Krishna presides over that material energy of his, and he generates these myriad life forms over and over, again and again. And that happens in accordance with the force of the natures of the living beings. So something for all of you to ponder about regarding the catchphrase. Swamiji reminds us of this term, the great annihilation, Mahapralaya, which we saw back in chapter 8. And in fact, he also reminds us that chapter 8, verses 16 through 19 is where we had discussed at length about creation, maintenance, and annihilation, that entire sequence as a repetitive cycle. And Swamiji, before this now, asks us that perhaps we have a question. He says, we might have a question that is, when that great annihilation, Mahapralaya, takes place, where do all the living beings go? We've seen it earlier as well, and Swamiji often mentions this state of suspended animation, and we saw details of that here in class as well. So at the end of that kalp, Mummy mentioned an important phrase, kalp she. So that's the end of Brahma's lifespan. It's only 100 years of Brahma, but it's a massively large number in terms of Earth years. We've talked about that, more than 311 trillion Earth years. Then this entire cosmic manifestation, it goes through annihilation, meaning it's going back to that unmanifest state, energy related. And the sequence is Panch Mahabhuta, the 5 gross elements. We talked about those: earth, water, fire, air, space. They merge into the Panch Tanmatras, the 5 subtle senses or the essence. And of course, we have the sense of sound, touch, sight, hearing, and taste. And then those Panch Tanmatras merge into Ahankar, the concept of ego, as Mummy said in class, the identification with I. And then that merges into Mahan, that's related to the intellect, and finally going into the Prakriti state, material energy, that primordial form. And then the answer to the question, Prakriti goes and rests. Well, where? It always rests in God. It's going to rest in the divine body of the Supreme Lord, Mahavishnu. In a later chapter, we'll likely learn more about this and some names and terminology for these different forms of Vishnu. So as Swamiji says, that is that state of suspended animation. The gross and subtle bodies are gone in the sense that they have merged back to where they came from, which is Maya, and again, Prakriti. What remains is the causal body. That's the thing that's always connected with the soul, and that has these endless lifetimes worth of, accounts of all of our karmas, as well as our sanskars and tendencies. And as we've often said in class and heard Swamiji say as well, at the start of that next kalp, so as Mummy mentioned in the Sanskrit phrases, kalp adao, when that next kalp starts, Vishnu, God, is going to just glance at Prakriti and let it unfold, let it do its work. So then the sequence we talked about will go in the other order. So you have Prakriti becoming Mahan, Mahan to Ahankar, Ahankar to the Panch Tanmatras, and finally to the Panch Mahabhutas. All that is eventually going to lead to the creation of these subtle and gross bodies, which Mummy also explained in class. And then there are these myriad life forms. We talked about 84 lakh, 84 lakh, or 8.4 million species or types of species. Those are the different kinds of forms that any living being will get as a suitable body through a suitable womb. And that's given based on a plane of existence, based on these sanskars and tendencies of the causal body, therefore in accordance with the force of the living being's natures. And that determines, of course, what subtleness, distinctions, and functions they have. Mummy, I'm going to pass it over to you for all these 3 verses.
So first we'll look at the first verse, and a very important word there is Matsthani. Matsthani means rest in me, rest in Sri Krishna, rest in Vishnu. Garbhodakshayi, So this word Krishna has used 3 times, previously in 2 verses and here. So basically, he's explaining to Arjun that think of space. The way space is the ultimate reality, okay? That is the absolute reality, absolute truth. And the whole vast atmosphere dwells in space. And just as space is not affected by what it contains, the different appearances of the world, similarly, that God is not affected by anything. It still stays away. It is still the Shanguli, many, many fingers away from all the finite things. The infinite cannot dwell in the finite. So basically, we have to learn that we are all made up of that same absolute reality, that same absolute truth. Kan kan mein base ho Ram. When we see a movie, on the screen, different things happen, floods come, fire happens, we connect with them, but nothing happens to the screen. It again goes back to the same thing. So similarly is the situation. We can understand by this example that everything is resting in God. It's only at the time of creation the things come out, and then they are being maintained, and then annihilation is done. That is the sequence in which God has planned and designed this whole universe. Now, all this happens based on the nature. So, what is the nature? The force of the nature, the gunas. He keeps on making different forms again and again, and that happens on the basis of gunas. And then gunas are what? That is what create our sanskars. So sanskar, the causal body, is the only thing which will go with us in every lifetime. And that is where those are the tendencies, those are the sanskars we are born with. Now we keep on taking janm in different species. Some species live for very small time. So there is a story whereby Naradji asks a question and God sends, okay, go there in that forest, there is a parrot. Naradji goes there, asks him the question, and the parrot immediately dies. Naradji doesn't get answer and he gets very worried. He goes back again to God. God says, go there. There's a cow. Go see the bacha of that cow. He goes there, he asks the question, and the cow, that bachra dies. Naradji is again very perturbed. He goes again, then God sends him another place. Go see that horse. Ask the question to horse. Again, the same thing happened. Naradji is now very, very perturbed. Again, he goes. Now God says, go to this place and there's a new child being born. Naradji says, I don't want to ask. Each time where I go, they die. God says, no, you will get your answer. And when he goes, now the child answers. So what is happening? That Atman was first born as a parrot, very quickly died as a bachda, as a horse, and now as a human. So basically, there could be some time between the birth of the next lifetime. Sometimes there could be a longer time. And now we see how some species live for very small time, some species live for longer time. And this is the human form where the tendencies go. Only the sanskar go, and this is the human form, which is where we can really build our account to reach God realization. So sanskar is the causal body, is the only thing that goes with us. So we learn another word here from verse number 7, that is Visrijami. Visrijami means manifest. God keeps on manifesting. And the third, verse number 8, we learn the word avashtabhya. Avashtabhya means presiding over. God is the one which is presiding over this whole universe, and he is the one who is, from whom everything is coming, and in whom everything goes in rest. Another example is the example of ocean and waves. A child will see only the the froth of the waves. We as ignorant people, we will see waves as water. And a wise saint standing there will see those waves as the whole ocean. So we can compare God with that ocean where everything is inside. Okay. Similarly, you see those biscuits, animal biscuits. There can be different shapes, right? It can be a horse, an elephant, okay? But the material with which it is made, that remains the same. That is sugar, flour, okay? That similarly, when you see different clay pots, okay, you see there are different shapes, but they are made of the same clay. Similarly, we have to understand that we are made from that same Brahman, that same God. He is residing in us, but still he is the Shanguli. He is still far above, and we just need to, on our path of spirituality, keep on taking baby steps to the path of God realization. Over to you, Gagan.
Thank you, Mummy. And indeed, a lot of connections you've made across the three verses, as well as what we covered last time as well. So, in fact, as we wrap up today, I noticed you also were able to connect to waves and ocean, which has come up last week, this week as well. So, as we wrap up, I'm going to wave, of course, but of course, also know that we're starting a new month soon. So, when we meet next time, it'll be the same, 8 a.m. Central Time, 6:30 p.m. India time. It'll be Saturday, 1st June 2024. As always, till then, thank you so much and Radhe Radhe.
Radhe Radhe.